Hello and welcome to day 25 of the Genesis of Androzani Advent Calendar for 2024. This is the finale and it's coming out late. I'm very sorry about that. I've been very busy and I'm filming this on Christmas Day here at this time, in this evening at around 9 p.m. So I'm very full. I've had a lot of ham and salmon and potatoes and ice cream and noodles and duck and chicken and lots of sugary drinks. So I am completely walloped by this day. But here, on this video, I'm here to do a ranking of, can you believe it, all the Doctor Who seasons. And by all, I mean all of them. I mean Classic Who, I mean New Who, and I mean Disney so far, which is going to be absolutely massive because there's been 40 of them. Yes, I've had this video in the mind for a while, probably a few years. I developed graphics for it a very long time ago, and I decided, why the fuck not? Why not do it now? I mean, clearly in a few months, season 2 of Disney Who will have come out, and we'll age this video, so maybe when that comes out I could pin a comment saying whereabouts I'd put it, what I'd put it under, what I'd put it above. I don't know, but you know what, I don't care. I'm just gonna do it. This is a big video and it's day 25 and I've got to deliver on something climactic and huge to end the Advent Calendar on for the year. So why the hell not? Let's just rank all the bloody seasons of this show. And yes, I'm going to be pretty weird throughout because of circumstances. Trust me, I'm not drunk. I don't ever drink alcohol. I just have severe ADD and I've had a lot of sugar. So let's go. Let's begin with number 40, which is Series 13, which includes Flux and the 2022 specials as one. Holy shit. I mean, a lot of people will say, well, it's because of COVID lockdown. It's not. You look at the way this season is written, even if there wasn't lockdown sanctions, this still would have been one of the worst. And the fact that it is lockdown makes it a visual sort of episodic nightmare, but the actual content of character, theme, world, plot is an absolute clusterfuck disaster. The dialogue is terrible, the comedy's terrible, the serious moments are terrible, the stakes are awful, and this season, series, whatever you want to call it, Series 13 of New Who was so bad that I had about half of my Twitter feed block me because I got into fights about plot armor, and I learned how much of an outsider I truly am in this argument, and now here we are. But that's okay. That's okay. We have to live with the decisions we make. But to this day, even all these few years later, I still firmly believe that Series 13 is the single worst season of Doctor Who ever, and one of the worst seasons of TV I've ever seen. The 13th Doctor is terrible, Yasmin Khan is terrible, and Dan Lewis, if you saw day 24, in my opinion, is the worst companion the show has ever had. Great, lovely, fucking what were they thinking? Number 39 is Series 12. Chibnall again. Oh dear. Jodie Whittaker's 13th Doctor. Oh dear. Yasmin Khan. Oh dear. Ryan Sinclair. Oh dear. Graham O'Brien. Oh dear. Terrible episodes. Oh dear. Sasha Dhawan's master being cringe. Oh dear. The Timeless Children. Oh dear. God-awful dialogue and stilted lines and terrible comedy. Oh dear. Retcons that didn't need to exist. Oh dear. Terrible plotting. Oh dear. Terrible politics. Oh dear. Yeah. Jesus Christ. Hate this era of Doctor Who. Haunting of Villa Diodati has some elements that could make up a good episode, but they are counterbalanced by bad elements that stop it from being a good episode. Everything else is bad. Moving on. My number 38. Oh, what do you think it's gonna be? Series 11. Also by Chris Chibnall, also the worst Doctor, also Yasmin Khan and Ryan Sinclair and Graham O'Brien, and not a single good episode. And most of them are really bad and have bad characters and bad writing and bad plotting. The arc is flat and hollow and dull and boring and stupid. And the finale is awfully contrived and awfully boring, and it wastes Mark Addy, and this was going to be a big starting point again for the show, and a lot of people tuned in for the start of Series 11, and then they tuned out by the end because it was just so fucking shite. And yes, terrible, the contrived setups to plots, the contrived executions of plots, terrible dialogue, terrible pacing, abhorrent character writing, and yeah, it's just, I guess maybe compared to the other two, there's a somewhat admirable quality because it was going for mostly original material. But because that original material is either written or it's heavily overseen by Chris Chibnall, who is the least creative and most fundamentally garbage TV writer in all of the BBC, it's shite and crap and awful, and I don't want to watch it again. Bye bye. My number 37 is Series 7. Oh, Stephen Moffat, that's where we begin. They're talking about the most volatile and crazy and fucked up era of the show, man. Like, we were just snorting lines every night because we couldn't figure out how to work out this timey-wimey bloody mess of a show. And Series 7 is easily the nadir of Stephen Moffat in charge of Doctor Who. I mean, my god, some of these episodes are so bad. Like Nightmare in Silver with Mr. Clever, or The Impossible Girl, I run you clever boy, or, you know, Series 7A with The Angels Take Manhattan, where you have this insanely silly way to write Amy and Rory out of the show. You've got Matt Smith at his most creepy, rapey, and not funny, and annoying, and cringe, and punchable. The Trenzalore arc is dumb. The fact that the previous season he always knew he was going to die at Lake Silencio. Now he always knew he was going to die at Trenzalore. In hindsight, I've soured on the consequences of the 50th too. So some of the build up, like the War Doctor, I just like, John Hurt's a great actor and it's lovely to have him play the role, but the actual overarching idea behind the retcon and how it was executed in the 50th, I'm personally not a fan of. And then, yeah, just some of the cheesiest and awful Power of Love, cringy, saccharine, sentimental endings to episodes, and lightning fast product pacing, no two-parters, and it's just, yeah, this season is, Series 7 is just an utter fucking Americanized wank of a mess. And it used to be the worst of the show until Chris Chibnall decided to drop 3 turds for us to enjoy. Moving on. My number 36 is Series 6. Hooray! This has a lot of the same issues that Series 7 has. It actually has a worse season arc somehow, because my god, the whole Doctor dying Lake Silencio and then River Song thing and all that all tied together is just incomprehensibly weird, and the payoff, not only in terms of it being silly and something out of, like, you know, when someone's trying to really piss you off with a subversive joke, and it's just the worst possible idea of what could be the answer to this big question, with, you know, the fact that, ooh, he was a robot the whole time, gotcha. And then, of course, you know, overly sexualized, cringy dialogue. Amy and Rory's characters are insanely volatile. They go from being great to terrible episode to episode, and it's just it's a horrible, awful, inconsistent mess. And then, of course, you've got some of the worst episodes in the show in there, but I think what saves it above the others is that there's a few that you can cherry pick out there, like The Doctor's Wife, The Girl Who Waited, and The God Complex, which I do think do stand head and shoulders above the rest of the series. For me personally, The God Complex in particular has a very intense amount of positives that I personally like about the show. And, you know, that and the episode that came before it, they really show some of Matt Smith's highlights as an actor. Yeah, so Series 6 has a few episodes that do stand out as being, you know, the exception to the rule, but most of the season is bleach to the eyes and bleach to the ears. No thank you. A bit of a tasty drink. My number 35 is Series 9. The most pretentious and overrated by Twitter season, because it's a work of modern art. It should be put in the Louvre next to the Mona Lisa. Oh, it's definitive television. There's never been better writing and acting and themes and chemistry and cinematography and symbolic language. And no, it's not that good. It's pretentious. It's very, very, for the most part, pretty piss poor attempt at making prestige television, but comes across as really lowbrow and crass. And there are a few exceptions. The Under the Lake two-parter has a lot of positives. Face the Raven has a lot of positives. And apart from one retcon I mentioned a few videos ago, Heaven Sent has a lot going for it. It has some of the best acting, some of the best cinematography, and some of the best music the show's ever done. And most of Stephen Moffat's writing is really genius. Conceptually, in terms of both as a mechanical sort of cool sci-fi concept, but also very edgy and violent and really feeding on the darkest sides of your emotion, and also thematically being a great tale about grief. And Peter Capaldi gets to do what he does best. But as a season arc as a whole, it is an absolute disaster mess, and everything that it does good, it then retroactively fucks up and makes bad. Of course, that being my most magnum opus of hate at the end of the season being Hellbent, which, you know, you could argue, critically speaking, there are worse episodes in terms of craft, but in terms of my personal love and relationship with Doctor Who, I've never in my life felt more betrayed by an episode than by Hellbent. And it's not just personal, it's also bad in terms of craft as well. I just want to make that very clear. This is not just me giving a personal bias. I also genuinely think that there are fundamental, massive middle fingers to the show within the episode. And yeah, Series 9 is very, very, very annoying and very pretentious and very overrated by snobs. My number 34 is Series 8. Sort of like Series 9, but to a lesser extent. I think it's also quite a bad season. It has some of the weirdest characterization for the Doctor. It's got a very mediocre run of episodes. Samuel Anderson's performance as Danny Pink is really terrible. I think he is very fake and obviously not convincing. And Clara Oswald is very inconsistent to her past, and they certainly make some choices. I mean, this is probably the most meat that Jenna Coleman gets to chew on in her run. because in Series 7 she's a vapid shell, and in Series 9 she's barely present, and the good they do in Face the Raven is ruined. Series 8's probably her best, in quotation marks, but in some ways it's also her worst at points because of how many times they wrench the knife in you. I think I'm pointing at Death in Heaven mostly for that, because my god, what the hell was Stephen Moffat thinking with some of that? But yes, 8 is tricky because I really want to like it. I really want to like Capaldi. I want to like the darker tone. I want to like the shift away from the silly American shit that Matt Smith's run became by the end. But I can't because of how weird and backwards and just strange some of the creative decisions were, and how much I do think that a lot of the character writing and plotting just isn't up to scratch overall. And you know, there's Mummy on the Orange Express and Flatline. Those are standouts, but no, apart from that, there's stuff, but it's just not. It's not Doctor Who. It's not the level that I expect from Doctor Who. It's not good enough of a standard for me to really want to go back to overall. And the bad parts are hideous. My number 33 is season 24. So, oh my god. See, it's tricky because I actually do enjoy the Seventh Doctor, and I do enjoy Mel Bush, but at the same time, it's so evident that this has become a caricature of Doctor Who in a lot of ways, and it just doesn't have enough of the groundedness and the legitimate dramatic prestige and merit to really make it worthwhile, because it has the more fluffy side of the show, and that's fine and dandy, but when that's almost the whole thing apart from one story, that's when it becomes tricky. I will say Ace's introduction in Dragonfire has a lot of positives. I personally love Paradise Towers as a story, but Delta and the Bannerman is a silly mess, and Time in the Rani fucks up the Sixth Doctor's regeneration and the Seventh Doctor's introduction, and yeah, it's hard to defend it once you really look at that as the whole picture. It's rushed, it's short, and, you know, one story that I love to watch is not enough to save it when the rest of them don't make up for it. So yeah, unfortunately, I will have to give this the classic Who wooden spoon, which is a real cliche because so many people do that to season 24, and I kind of feel bad for it for that. But I almost feel like there is good reason to. I did consider putting it one place above, and I have reasons for that, or even two places above, but whatever. I don't feel guilty about putting it here. I just wish that I could put the season with Paradise Towers a bit higher, that's all I'll say. But yes, we are very, very slowly starting to move into the show I really recognize, and the show that I really go, ooh, yes, Doctor Who, I like to watch that show. But we're not quite there yet. My number 32 is season 23. Oh my god! Oh! We were so close! We were so close to having an interesting, really outside-the-box season that had done something that the show had never done before. This idea of a trial that looks at the past, present, and future and then culminates in a Matrix finale. On paper, that sounds like a top 15 season of the show. Genuinely, this is like so unique, and I'm like, oh yes, explore something different. And then you watch it and it has really interesting parts, like I think my favorite probably being Mind Warp. The way that it explores the idea of a companion being betrayed by a doctor who's been washed and is unstable, combined with the fact that Colin had already built up in the previous two seasons as having a side to him that was unpredictable and almost like, you know, we're getting now to a point with this character where it's like, is he bipolar? Can he actually control his dark side? You know, we were so close, and then we get this interesting thing of introducing a new companion, Mel, where, you know, we have never seen her first adventure, but we're starting to see her in the role already. It's so outside the box and so different. And then we get the ultimate foe, and Robert Holmes dies, and Eric Sayward walks away, and Pip and Jane Baker have to finish the story. And it falls so fucking flat, and I hate it, and it's so frustrating. And I can't put it higher on the list, because as a season, it's a failure. And it's especially a failure because all 14 episodes are so tied together. Like, you can't just cherry pick stories in Trial of a Time Lord. It doesn't work like that. This is an arc of a season. It's all one thing. And here we are. That being said, Colin Baker is a great actor. Sometimes the crash scenes are a little cheesy, but to be honest, I can still enjoy them in a stagey way. There are positives to season 23, but it's just the story it doesn't live up to its concept, and it just drops the ball so hard. Oh, yeah. What a shame. Genuinely, what a shame. They had an opportunity to create one of the most unique special seasons of the show, and instead it's sadly one of the worst ones. Anyway, my number 31 is season 22. Well, the thing with season 22 is that if I stop thinking about what is morally right, it's a lot easier to enjoy. Like, if I pretend like the things about the season that are really, like, questionable, there is a popcorn entertainment value because there is a lot of very dark, sadistic humor all throughout this season. Like, it's really, really fun. Really fun if you're an edgelord and you like that kind of thing. But then when you actually think about stuff, like how Attack of the Cybermen has just an insufferable amount of fan wank in it, or you think about how the way the Master returns in the Mark of the Rani, and how, like, it's so ridiculous his resurrection is just completely brushed away, like the stakes of Planet of Fire just didn't matter. Or, you know, something like The Two Doctors, where the sort of eugenic quality of the antagonist isn't respected by the Doctor, and it's kind of like this weird backwards moral that's very out of character. Or you think about Time Lash as a whole, which is just holy shit, man. Like, the Doctor believing that ultimately what was wrong was the guy was ugly, not that he was a bad person. You are ugly, no one will ever love you, fuck off, like that sort of thing. Yeah, it really puts a lot of things into question. My highlights of the season are Vengeance on Varos and Revelation of the Daleks. Not to claim that they're perfect stories, they're not, but I personally think that they make the most out of what season 22 is going for, whereas the rest of the season kind of squanders a lot of potential. And again, Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant have really, like, bantering chemistry, and a lot of people hate it because it's really nasty, toxic bickering, but there is a comedic level to it if you have the palate for it. However, there is also the factor that when you really think about it, Perry is kind of the Doctor's prisoner, which is also very strange. It's weird. It's weird. And yeah, this phase of the show was just strange. It was just weird, full of weird choices, and I feel bad for Colin because he's such an exceptional actor. And, of course, we got Big Finish. His run with Evel and Smythe, if that was on TV, man, his era, at least at that point, would be so in a very, very different place on the list. I'm sure of it. But yeah, sorry, Colin. I love you, man, but this was not your fault. My number 30, regrettably, unfortunately, and disappointingly, is Disney Who Season 1. The return of Russell T Davies and the debut of Ncuti Gatwa. Both men I love for their previous work. Millie Gibson, a great young actress to play Ruby Sunday. And honestly some episodes that I really enjoyed, mainly if we include the specials, Wild Blue Yonder, but also within the season, 73 Yards and Dot and Bubble, I was a big fan of. But as I discussed on day 1 and day 2 of this calendar, it's so lacking and disappointing, especially when it comes to the character arcs. It represents traits that you'd expect out of a Russell T Davies season of the show, but it doesn't fully manifest in its actual real meat and potatoes. And it's curious and fascinating, and I do wonder what the core issue and reason is behind why this very talented and just brilliant writer has somehow managed to almost eat away at what he does best and present some other fairly good things for the most part, but it's just so disappointing. It's weird. It's so weird. And I can't fully dislike it either, because there's things I like about the season too. But yeah, it's tough. It's a tough one to dissect. Obviously, because it was the most recent one. I mean, I know I've had like at least 6 months to think about it, but I'm still puzzled. I'm still puzzled as to how this sort of came about. And I wonder if Disney has something to do with it. I wonder if the fact that there was a reason why he left the show in the first place. Maybe. Or maybe it's just a whole set of events and there's not just one reason. But I'm looking forward to season 2 to see if anything improves in the areas where I feel like it needs to. I think the reason why season 1 from Disney Who has ranked so low on the list, though, is because of the finale. I think the finale does a lot of damage to my perception of the entire arc. And because there's only 8 episodes and the finale's 2 parts and it's such a dominating part of the season, it feels like such a big anchor on the rest of it. Because a lot of what happens in the storytelling throughout the season really rides on it, and then it doesn't pay off in the way it should. It's a shame, because I do really love Ncuti as an actor, and as I've said for many years on this channel, Russell is one of my favourite writers in television, but this wasn't really what I wanted for the most part. Again, there were moments, but as a season, no. Now, the next 2 I grapple with for quite a few reasons, and I'm still just not sure exactly where each one should go. My number 29 is Series 5. It came very close to topping the next one. Very close. Because of how my opinion on the one that's just above it has been going down recently in some aspects. And it is close, but even at his best, and trust me, this is his best, I'm just not the biggest fan of the 11th Doctor. Even in its, like, initial, quite well-intentioned and well-executed concept, it's just not my taste. Fantasy and fairy tale and all that usually isn't my preferred style. It's not like it's impossible for me to enjoy it. You know, I'd always willing to give it a chance, but I just think this specific kind of Stephen Moffat fairy tale is definitely outside of my taste. But it's more than that. I do think there are fundamental issues with Series 5. I think it's a very volatile season. Volatile in a more healthy way compared to the ones that came after it, like 6 and 7. But it's still a mixed bag, which makes it tricky because the ones that have more consistent writing tend to be the Moffat ones that have the more fairy tale-esque elements that I'm not drawn to. So it's a weird one to navigate because I think Victory of the Daleks is bad. I think Vampires of Venice, personally, there's a lot I just really don't like about the episode and the characters and the way the story plays out. Not to say there aren't good moments. And of course, the Chibnall Hungry Earth two-parter is god-awful, and I really don't like The Lodger either. I think it's cringe and kind of pitiful in a way. And there are things about The Beast Below I think are super cringe too. When you get to stuff like The 11th Hour, which is good, or The Time of Angels, which is hairy, but has its merits, it's a very conflicting and frustrating experience because I'm experiencing positive and negative thoughts and emotions at the same time. And that makes it an interesting, critical exercise, but not necessarily a relaxing experience watching a TV show. Because I'm both thinking, wow, that's a cool idea, and ooh, I don't like that. Which is very unique and difficult to describe. I find this finale as well, the Pandora opens the Big Bang, a very fascinating sort of study of how Steven Moffat decided to take the show going forward. Because it's very different to pretty much any Doctor Who story that came before it, and possibly you could say the same as anything that came after it. Because anytime he tried to do something like this again, or similar, it never really did it this way. So it is a standout in its own right, but it's also a standout in a very peculiar way too, especially with the second part being so heavily plot focused. And it's like, when an episode is all, or almost all, tying one big shoelace and not much else, when I'm in a position where I don't know how to feel about these characters given how mixed it's been throughout the season, and this kind of plotting that's isn't exactly what I necessarily am looking for, without other elements to compound with it, then how am I supposed to feel? And that kind of doesn't, like, the Big Bang doesn't leave me in anger, it just leaves me with questions, question marks, and curiosity, which is interesting because it's been 14 years since it came out, but I just don't know what to think about Series 5 sometimes, because I can see how in its tone and its ideas it would appeal, but in its actual effect, I feel like I have some kind of mental disconnect that can't quite seem to figure out what is that last oomph that puts all the pieces together, because that's the part I find tricky. But, you know, it's better than the ones that came below it, so I can say that much. My number 28, by a very, very small hair, is Series 10. Now, I don't think at this point, really looking back on it, I feel I don't actually have much reason to put this above Series 5, apart from one thing. I just think I prefer Peter Capaldi as an actor over Matt Smith in Doctor Who. Maybe if it was some other show, or some other character, or some other comparison, I might prefer Matt. I've got House of the Dragon coming up next year for me to get into the first time, and if I was to compare that to, say, I don't know, Capaldi in The Suicide Squad, or, you know, whatever, if it was something like that, maybe I prefer Matt. But when it comes to Doctor Who, when it comes to playing this character under the vision of Moffat, I just feel like I get more out of Capaldi in Series 10. There's something about the way he plays the role in most episodes that just squeezes more juice. Possibly the fact that Matt in Series 5 and Capaldi in Series 10 are like at opposite ends of their careers in terms of experience, and that might have something to do with why I get a more dense satisfaction out of his performance than I do Matt's. Not to downplay Matt's, you know, talents when he was 26, but there is something to be said about Capaldi in his late 50s, you know, the kind of things he could do. He's also got a more expressive face, and that's just not fair. But yeah, I used to really like Series 10. I still like it to some extent, but I'm very gradually falling away from it. I don't love the finale like I used to. I'm very mixed on it these days. There's some episodes in there like Oxygen and Extremis, which I can rewatch and really enjoy. And Bill Potts has her positives, and I think she has some negatives, honestly, but I do think she has positives too, and that makes her worthwhile. Nardole, don't like his comedy, but I like his more serious moments. The Masters arc, again, I have conflicted thoughts on. Interesting ideas, but the inciting incident is a bit of an issue. So it is a breath of fresh air from the Clara era, in that sense that it feels like it has a weight off his shoulders. But do I actually like it as much as my beloved pre-2010 Doctor Who? I'm not sure, because I feel like the reason why at the point Series 10 comes in a marathon, why I feel a sense of gratification and pleasantry towards it, is more so because it reminds me of things I like about previous Doctor Who, as opposed to actually being the things I like about previous Doctor Who. And so, for that reason, I feel like it deserves to be above the things I disliked that came before and after it. But also, I just think I prefer Classic Who and RTD1, and that's just how it is, really. Well, obviously, apart from the 3 Classic Who seasons I already mentioned, because those are special, flawed cases. But, you know, I wouldn't blame someone for rating Series 10 fairly high, although I do think, in some circles, very small circles, not big ones, but in some circles I do think Series 10 is a bit of a sacred cow because of what it represents and because of the vibes that it gives off. I do think it is a bit of a sacred cow. It is not by any means a perfect season. It is, like a lot of Moffat's writing in his run, good and bad, but better than his worst, and that is something. My number 27 is season 25. This one is pretty simple. I really like Remembrance of the Daleks. I really like the Happiness Patrol. I really like The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. Silver Nemesis is quite bad, but has bits I kind of enjoy. The Seventh Doctor is great. Ace is a great character, even if Sophie's a bit of a childish actress. That is a bit of a hot take, honestly. She's a great, she seems like a great human being. But the CBeebies acting isn't my favourite. But as a character, she's wonderful. And it's very short. And it's not necessarily, not as much as I would say for something like Series 5. It's not my favourite tone of the show ever. But it's one I can enjoy. Seven gets some great stuff to do. Ace gets some great stuff to do. There's some really cool clownish stuff. As an anniversary, there's both celebratory stuff with the Daleks, but there's also some really interesting meta-textual nerdy stuff in Greatest Show. I like season 2025, but again, Silver Nemesis doesn't help because the Cartmire Master Plan kind of becomes a bit of a clown show in that episode. When it should be a more underplayed and subdued arc that sort of wrinkles on the show as opposed to becoming what the show is. And that's what I would say. My number 26 is season 21. Most of this season is lovely. Davison is exceptional at the third act of his arc when he is completely lost his mind and is sick and fed up of being underestimated. Tegan's exit arc is great. Turlough's exit arc is great. Perry's introduction is really interesting. Caves of Androzani is one of the greatest stories in the show's history. But the reason why it's this low is Warriors of the Deep and the Twin Dilemma are quite bad in many respects, as they undermine what the show is all about and the character, and they have some very questionable plotting, especially in Warriors, all the way from The Awakening to Caves. If that was season 21, this would be way higher. It's great stuff, but what can you do? For Warriors of the Deep, I mostly blame Margaret Thatcher, but for the Twin Dilemma, I don't know what to do about that. That's just... That one's just difficult to understand, how they got that wrong. My number 25 is season 20. They did the thing with an anniversary season by having returning elements. Probably my favourite version of that is the idea behind the Black Guardian trilogy. because they gave a character that was mostly off-screen in the key to time and appeared at the very end a full run of stories. It's mostly about Turlough, to be honest. But the fact that he got a full run of stories of Mordred Undead, Terminus, and Enlightenment to fully embody this idea of what the morals behind the light and darkness are, and for it to tie into the characters, was great. Snake Dance is one of my favorite Davison stories. Bloody love that. Obviously, I want to include the Five Doctors in this. That has some positives, but it does have some negatives. And then Arc of Infinity, I like parts of it and I dislike parts of it. King's Demons is tricky to praise. I do think there are some nice bits, but there are also some not so good bits about it. Overall, season 20 is mildly mixed, but mostly good. I think as a middle point for Davison, he does a really good job of transitioning from, you know, the very happy, optimistic, but slightly naive Doctor that we got before Adric's death, and then transitioning into the more sort of losing his confidence and really starting to realize, oh shit, things aren't the way I thought they were, and slowly eking towards that boiling point that we got in the next season. Davison's great in this one. I think Nyssa's exit goes underrated, as does Turlough's entry. Enlightenment is a masterpiece, one of my favourite episodes of Doctor Who. And yeah, overall, it's a pretty solid season with a few bumps. My number 24 is season 19. A debut of Davison, and this one is a really enjoyable ride, and then you get Time Flight at the end, which is shite and bad, has a few redeeming elements, but it's mostly bad, especially how it handles the aftermath of Adric's death. What the fuck were they doing? But apart from that, this is just fun. It's a great time. Davison's a really fun Doctor. Some people aren't into what they would call the terrible trio. I like Tegan and Adric, and I think this is fine. I think the banter works. I think it's this dynamic in season 19 does what 13 and the fam failed to do in series 11, with the idea of the Doctor sort of being caring for a group. I guess in this case it's slightly different because the Doctor's the oldest in the situation. I mean, technically the Doctor's still the oldest in series 11 too, but just visually speaking, obviously Graham looks older than 13. Yeah, this has heart and character, and it is a little bit high school at points, but it does it with a purpose. The TARDIS feels like a house again. It feels like a family house. It has like a beating heart behind it, and you know, it's not my favorite era of the show, but I think it has a lot of positives, and it's a very consistent run apart from the finale. So yeah, season 19 is here, and I like it. And Peter Davison is very underrated as the Doctor. My number 23 is season 3. This is a spicy one. I believe this is the longest season ever. I think it's 45 episodes or something ridiculous like that. Probably because this season features heavily 12 episodes. 13 if you include Mission to the Unknown of the Daleks Master Plan arc, which is absolutely enormous and does a lot. Of course, you've got The Massacre, which is extremely dark, but then you've also got some very upbeat stories like The Ark and the Celestial Toymaker and the Gunfighters. This season is probably tonally and production-wise the most inconsistent in the show, but somehow I think having Hartnell, even though in a couple of episodes he wasn't as present, but having Hartnell there as that real force, especially in the first half of the season. But I think mainly the thing that really holds season 3 together is Stephen Taylor. As a character and as a companion, his run in season 3 is a really strong one, and he provides a lot of great moments. And I think Peter Purves as a sort of semi-lead role to Hartnell is truly wonderful in season 3, especially when he carries the massacre. The roster changes so much because you've got Vicky and Steven at the start, but then Vicky, leaves in Troy and they get Katarina, but then Katarina dies and we meet Sarah Kingdom, but then she dies, and then we meet Anne Chaplet in the massacre, but then she doesn't become a companion, so then her descendant Dodo Chaplet becomes a companion, and then at the end of the season, Steven goes off in the Savages and Dodo goes off in the War Machines, and then the Doctor picks up Ben and Polly. So it's this huge rotating door of companions and different producers, and it's a bit wild, but in a way, that the ugly mess that is season 3 is kind of appealing exactly for the reasons that it is ugly, in the sense that it has such a crazily interesting roller coaster of a season behind it, and the fact that they even got through it and managed to pull off multiple really great Doctor Who stories in there for me. I really like it for that, and not the easiest one to rewatch start to finish, given that most of it is missing episodes and it's so bloody long, but in the end I think it's worth it. And like I said, some very iconic stories in this season, and they did some very unique stuff. So for that, and for what is Hartnell's full last season, they gave him a lot to do, a lot of big moments, some of his best acting ever, and big moments happen in this season, and we have season 3 to thank, to give Hartnell that sort of, those more darker, explored areas of the character before he was sent off in season 4. My number 22 is season 15. Awkward. It's awkward because I love and don't love this season at the same time. I will get the positive out the way. I love the TARDIS team, the Fourth Doctor and Leela and K9. Great. All fun stuff there. However, the issue with season 15 is that this is a transition between the Hinchcliffe Holmes era and the Graham Williams, eventually Douglas Adams, but not at this point. I guess here it was Anthony Reid, but it really is the transition point between seasons 14 and 16. And it has this weird tone where it's not quite gothic, but it's also not quite, out there adventure like the Williams era is later. And for that, it just has this very awkward feeling throughout. But that being said, Horror of Fang Rock is an all-time Doctor Who story. Image of the Fendahl is great. The Sunmakers is great and underrated. The Invisible Enemy is mixed, but there are parts I like about it. Underworld, I like the story, but don't like the green screen. And The Invasion of Time is my least favorite Classic Who story ever. So it's hard to judge. It's hard to really say, do I like season 15? Do I dislike season 15? The answer to that question, though, both of those questions, is yes. And yes. And no. And no. So that's why it's at number 22. My number 21 is season 11. The season known for the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith. The Time Warrior and Invasion of the Dinosaurs, I love. Death to the Daleks and The Monster of Peladon are weird. Planet of the Spiders is also weird, but Pertwee's regeneration is legendary and has some of my favorite acting in the show. Not having Delgado in Pertwee's final season because he passed away is very unfortunate. So, unfortunately, that has that against it. Probably one of my favorite things that is unique to season 11, though, is the arc of Captain Mike Yates. I absolutely love what they do with Captain Mike Yates in season 11. I think it's super, super creative and unique for the time, and it's something I look back on very fondly. John Pertwee and Elizabeth Sladen are legends. Both of them give great performances and are highlights in all 5 stories. But, as I said, it just doesn't quite hit the legendary status, I believe, of his other seasons. Because despite the fact that I love the first 2, the other 3 aren't necessarily some of my favorites, I won't lie. And that's why season 11 ends up here, but it's still good enough and strong enough to ride this high. And for that, I praise it. I think we're at the point in the show where I really like the season. My number 20 is Classic Who Season 1. With the legend William Hartnell, and you got Ian Chesterton, Barbara Wright, and Susan Foreman. This season has some of the most defining and legendary Doctor Who stories of all time in it. I would say, for me, the Daleks, Marco Polo, and the Aztecs represent that idea the best. I also find positives in all the others. Yes, you could maybe argue episode to episode, it's not the most consistent. It has a varied level of writing quality. But the thing that I would argue is consistent about this season and is so good throughout is the characterization that the script editor David Whittaker was able to craft for these 4 people with the Doctor, Susan, Ian, and Barbara. The development they go through is genuinely great, some of the best the show's ever done. Hartnell as the first Doctor is so enigmatic and mysterious and standoffish, but then you see him warm and blossom, and it's gorgeous. Yeah, there's some great performances, especially from those big leads, and there's some really great stories within this season. And yeah, it's a great way to start the show. Not a perfect way, but it is a great way to start the show, and I feel like when you are at the point in the show, when you're at a very beginning point, getting the characters right then, compared to getting all the stories right, is the balance. If you had to choose one of those 2 things to have more good of than the other, if you're forced to, characters is the one that you should have, because first impressions of characters that are going to be in every episode is very vital to a show's health. And the fact that they were able to get that right puts season 1 in a very high esteem for me. And the fact that on top of that we got a few very legendary stories that I love is an added bonus. So yes, bravo season 1. Very well to give us so many years of this wonderful show. Thank you very much. Number 19 is season 2. And this was at one point possibly my favorite Classic Who season, but it's not anymore. That doesn't mean that I don't love it. I just think that, critically speaking, it is very all over the place tonally, and you could argue to some extent there's some quality shifts here and there. But again, just like the first season, characters. You know, Susan gets her exit, and that's all done beautifully. Hartnell in season 2, I feel you could argue is at his best. Ian and Barbara and their last run is so amazing. I love Vicky. I absolutely love Vicky. And of course we get Stephen Taylor's introduction at the end. This is a very monumental season. It got very high ratings when it came out, probably because of Dalek Mania. It had to get a lot right, and they had to try a lot of different things, and they did try a lot of different things. This season, like season 1, has a few stories in here that are some of my favorites in the show, like the Romans, the Crusade, and the Time Meddler, just to give a few examples. I also think the Space Museum is really, really underrated as a piece of metafiction for the show. I think it does things that maybe the casual viewer won't ever really appreciate, but someone like me, who really likes to dive deep into tropes, loves the Space Museum for that. Yes, there are flaws with other stories like the Dalek Invasion of Earth, or The Chase, or, you know, The Wet Planet, admittedly. there are bits and pieces and everything in this season that I can pick apart and love. The rescue's really cool for the way it introduces Vicky as well. I think that as character development work deserves its praise for a lot of things. And I honestly really think Planet of Giants is a cool idea and it does a lot of fun things. So, yeah, Season 2 is a very fun ride. But I think I am just starting to recognize the value in tighter and more cohesive seasons than the more sprawling and wildly toned stuff like this. And yeah, taste shifts over time and that's natural and normal, but I still love Season 2 for what it is. My number 18 is Season 9. Yes, this is so fascinating because there are stories in this season that I think are both overrated and underrated. The thing I think is the most overrated about this season is the Sea Devils, which tends to be people's favorite from this season, but it's actually my least favorite from this season because I think the Mutants is a super underrated political allegory for the apartheid done in Alien Planets. Love that story. And the Time Monster, it is bonkers, but it is one of my favorite Jon Pertwee stories. I love what it does with, you know, the pendulum theory and the way that ties into the Doctor and the Master's relationship and all the humor and adventure and wild, wonderful things that come out of it. I love that. The Curse of Peladon is one of my favorite Doctor Who stories of all time. Day of the Daleks is cool. Feels more like a new Who story than a classic Who story, not gonna lie. But it's cool. Yeah, it's a cool story. I think the Sea Devils is fun for the first 4 parts, but it's just... I think it's a lot of wasted potential, really. I think there's a lot of things they could have done differently about the Sea Devils, and by the time you get to the end and this very intriguing political discourse is solved with the sonic screwdriver and military hardware, it feels like it's had the brains ripped out of it for some very stylish fun. That being said, Pertwee and Delgado are great fun in the story, so can't blame it for that. I really like Season 9. If the Sea Devils was what I want it to be, I think I would love Season 9 even more, and it would probably creak towards my top 10 because I think there's a lot of very underappreciated elements to Season 9 that get very well. Oh my god, how do I forget to mention Jo Grant? Jo Grant in Season 9 is wonderful in every story. She's lovely. Katie Manning is lovely. Characterization's lovely. She's developed from Season 8 and it leads well into Season 10. Yeah, I love Jo. I love her in Season 9 and I love Jon Pertwee. He's so oozing with charisma. My number 17 is Season 8. This season, a bit like Season 15, is a transitional one because it's the transition of tone between 7 and 9, because 7 is very much the Derek Sherwin idea for the show. Season 9 is when the show fully embraces the Barry Letts version of the show. But Season 8 kind of represents a transitional point where you get a bit of both. And I do think the Sherwin parts of Season 8 are the parts I prefer. My favourite story being The Mind of Evil, which feels like something out of Season 7. I really like Terror of the Autons. I really love The Claws of Axos. I think Colony in Space is very underrated. The Demons is probably my least favourite, but there are still really cool ideas and positives in there. But I definitely think it's one of the most cheesy Classic Who stories. It's certainly got elements that just... they make me sort of... I don't know. It's just not my kind of, like, old-timey sort of storytelling and, like, very cartoonish versions of the Doctor at points. There's also a few dodgy lines here and there. But overall, Season 8 is really solid, and yeah, they use UNIT very well, and Roger Delgado as the Master in every story, he's one of my favourite actors the show's ever had. He's so deliciously charismatic and fun, and some people consider it overkill. I just see him as a recurring character in the same way that I'd see a companion, except he's an antagonist instead of a protagonist. Jo Grant's introduction is very cute and adorable, and she's very much, sometimes to the point of bullying, but she's very much underestimated, and she uses her bravery and her heart to really prove herself worthy. And over time, in season 9 and 10, she grows that respect and admiration, and it's a very solid starting point for her. And Katie Manning, as always, is lovely and charming. And the season introduces Mike Yates, who I already mentioned in season 11. I really loved where he ended up. So yeah, great stuff. Love season 8. Good season of the show. Well done. Thank you very much. My number 16 is season 4. Talk about transitions in the show. My God. The idea at 1966 that someone else could play the Doctor. What are you talking about? And then Patrick Troughton comes on and you're like, oh, of course someone else can play the Doctor. He's brilliant. The 10th Planet introduces the Cybermen and the idea of regeneration. Genius. The Power of the Daleks is one of my favorite Doctor Who stories of all time. It's absolutely perfect. I think it's perfect. It's pretty good. And then, of course, you got Ben and Polly throughout the season. This introduces Jamie and Victoria. You've got great stuff like the Moon Base, the Macra Terror, the underrated Faceless Ones, which has some amazing ideas. The Evil of the Daleks, which isn't one of my top favorites, but it's got some great parts in it. Same with the Highlanders, really fun. And there are issues with the Smugglers and the Underwater Menace, but I can still enjoy them for what they are. As I said, this season is a big transition for the show. This is a big change, and they had a lot to do and a lot to set up for the future. But they, in that time when they were working hard on re-engineering the core of the show and the characters, they cast someone who was perfect for the show in Patrick Troughton, and they gave us some amazing Doctor Who stories to make up for that change taking place. So for that, season 4 gets very high marks from me. It has the most missing episodes out of any season of the show, which is sad, but a lot of them have been animated and that has helped. But if any of you in the world have the original tapes of The Power of the Daleks, please return them. I want to see Chris Barry's direction. I want to see it. I am convinced that the original broadcast of Power was utter dynamite, and I want to see it. Anyway, season 4 is great. Troughton's a legend. Moving on. My number 15 is series 2. Oh my god, I'm going to piss off everyone because I praise the one with cringe romance. Well, guess what? I don't care. Because it's got a lot of good aspects. Very good aspects. Very interesting, personal, emotional arcs and storytelling. David Tennant's my favorite Doctor. It's not his best season, but he is great in it. This season has great episodes like School Reunion, the underrated Tooth and Claw, The Girl in the Fireplace, and some of that Sideman two-parter is exquisite, especially for Mickey's character. Then, of course, you got The Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit, which is amazing and one of the best Doctor Who stories possibly ever. I really love the finale with Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. Not a perfect season. There are some hiccups here and there, like Fear Her and The Idiot's Lantern and New Earth. I know a lot of people hate Love and Monsters. I don't. I love it for reasons that could probably be described as disturbing, but that's okay. I don't care. I like Series 2 a lot, more than a lot of people online, and this being the weakest of RTD1 for me says a lot about his prime as a writer in Doctor Who. I wish Ncuti got something this good, and I feel like a lot of people who complain about Series 2 are dismissing things about the show that ought to be praised and done again. Now, that doesn't mean we need to have the Doctor in a romance again, because that story has been told, but just fundamental writing traits and efforts that Russell did really well at the time. I wish people were kinder on, because I genuinely think Series 2 has a lot going right for it. And there's just certain things that rub people the wrong way. And I can't control that, and that's okay. But I think Series 2 is overhated. Really overhated. And gives you, as a fan watching it, a lot more than you might think. A lot more value. Especially given the circumstances of Eccleston dropping out so early. Billie Piper as an actress does an absolutely superb job playing Rose Tyler. And yeah, maybe some of you think she's a selfish, unlikable bitch. I think her unaspirational traits make her a more interesting and dynamic character as opposed to a despicable one. Now, maybe not everyone has the taste for that kind of character, but I do, and that's why I really like it. Mickey is exceptional in Series 2, and what haven't I already said about David Tennant's Doctor? He's the best. My number 14 is Season 17. Yes, I know, a lot of people will put this very low. Another one where it's almost like you need to have a certain palette of taste for the show. I love talking about the Fourth Doctor's arc of him wanting a holiday that he sets up in Robot, because I feel like, in a way, Season 17 is that holiday. It is the finally, yes, Romana, I've waited so many years for this, but now I can finally have that holiday. And that's when you get some of the goofiest and most cheeky and fun bits of Doctor Who, mixed in with some wild Douglas Adams ideas. Stories like City of Death and The Creature from the Pit and Nightmare of Eden and The Horns of Nimon. And I do include Shada in this. Shada's great, and it's canon. The big blunder with Season 17, I feel, is some of what Destiny of the Daleks does. I think that really is where the season pales. Not to say I think it's one of the worst ever, because I don't. I don't think Destiny is one of the worst ever. I think there are a lot more admirable aspects to its ideas and its execution than people give it credit for sometimes. But it is, for me, the one sort of slight black mark on 17, because I love City of Death and Shada, which a lot of people other people do. And I think The Creature from the Pit and Nightmare of Eden are both extremely underrated. And The Horns of Nimon is possibly the best banter and taking the piss out of something, certainly in this show, possibly I've ever seen. Because it's about a labyrinth circuit board and there's a really high concept sci-fi idea behind it. But the presentation couldn't be anything further from that level of intellectual display, because it is a fun pantomime stage show and I fucking love it for that. So, yes, Season 17 is very fun and Tom Baker is very wild and bug-eyed. And Romana's great, and K9, well, David Brierley's not as good as John Leeson, but he's still K9, still the same writing, so acceptable. My number 13 is Season 26. Wow, I haven't talked about Sylvester McCoy in a while. This one is tricky because I could put it lower and higher. Lower because it's low on stories, it's very short, but higher for consistency. I think why I would be more favored to rank 26 highly is the idea of quality over quantity. And that's why it would rank higher than something, say, like Season 3. Which has quite a few stories that I really love in it, but it's so big, and it's so boom, 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 as opposed to 26, which is a very tight arc about 7th Doctor and Ace. And Battlefield being the introduction instead of the fun story to start, but still seeding a bit of that character in it, and sort of that familiarity with the Brigadier. But then once you get to the 3 Ace trilogy arc of Ghostlight, The Curse of Fenric, and Survival, you get some of the most profound and interesting character development and writing the show's ever done. And Andrew Cartmel really, really finally hits his stride and gets his final form on what he really wants to do with the show. And it's fascinating, and it's really interesting, and in many ways great. And then the show got cancelled, and it ended on this. I am curious to see what our season 27 would have been like if Sylvester had gone into the 90s. But that is out of the question, and the only way we can really experience that is with the Big Finish main range with the 7th Doctor, and then eventually the 8th Doctor. And I am highly content with what we got there anyway, so that's fine. But yeah, season 26 is super consistent. McCoy is at his best. Once again, as I said, Sophie Aldred's sort of CBeebies acting isn't my favourite, although I will say she does have the most bravado and presence in 26 compared to 24 and 25. She certainly feels like she's grown up a bit, and she's really come out of her shell. And there is a lot to like. It's very unique tonally, and season 26 isn't one I go back to a lot, but when I do go back to it, I really enjoy it. And yeah, it's a very solid, consistent final season for Classic Who, and that's why it's this high. My number 12 is season 18. One of the most divisive seasons in Classic Who, but I am on the side that loves it. Funny that the Worst of Classic Who arc on my channel that ran for 6 years started with the Leisure Hive. It started with me disliking it, but then when I rewatched it in 2021, I really liked it. Obviously, it still has some presentation things that are very wild, that are still there, but in terms of actual narrative writing and really dissecting the nitty-gritty details of the science fiction behind it, and once I really got a taste for that kind of storytelling, I started to see parts of season 18 like I'd never seen them before. In contrast to the wild and wacky and wonderful Douglas Adams style of Doctor Who, this Chris Bidmead style is very scientific. It has its fun moments, but it's more focused on the intellectual and, you know, the actual what is this show doing? What is the audience of the show really learning about the universe within this show? And Meglos is not great. The Leisure Hive has flaws, but I really enjoy it. But everything after that, what I call the Entropy arc, Full Circle, State of Decay, Warrior's Gate, The Keeper of Traken, and Legopolis, is some of my favourite Doctor Who I've ever seen. It is directed beautifully. The characterization is intricate and fascinating. The science fiction concepts are highly intellectual and really, really rewarding the more you dig into it. The scripting is thought-provoking, and it really digs its heels into its ideas and pushes them as far as they can go in a serialized format. The introduction of Adric is fascinating as a character and his backstory. It's super unique and layered. We get the fun with Romana and K9, and we get Nyssa and Tegan too. But for me, the true, wonderful value of season 18 in its story is the decay and the entropy arc for Tom Baker's Fourth Doctor. And yes, you've heard all those stories about how his morale behind the scenes was very low at the time. He didn't like being around Lalla Ward because their relationship was at a nadir at the time. They were going through some shit. And he was very clocked out of Doctor Who. But he's still a professional. He still turned up and did his job. He took the fucking role seriously in this season. And he nailed one of the most world-weary and sullen and alien but aged and mature performances of the Doctor that's ever been, with still that twinkle and that smile and still that jolly old, oh come on K9. And I love his ending. The fact that him trying to avoid his responsibility for his entire run, but then him to take the ultimate responsibility and self-sacrifice in the end, and that leading to his regeneration, is perfect for the longest running Doctor in the TV show. I love season 18. I think it's wonderful. Not perfect, but conceptually and execution-wise, for the most part, it is fucking amazing. And I feel like now that I'm speaking this way, we've gotten to the part of Doctor Who that makes me go, holy shit, this might be my favorite show I've ever seen. My number 11 is season 10. The first anniversary season, we have the three Doctors with Troughton and Hartnell coming back, and we have some good stuff at the, some interesting aspects of the Time Lords and Unit all involved in that celebration. But I actually feel the season progresses into far bigger territories when the anniversary isn't the focal point, because the other story from this season that I don't think hits its full potential is Planet of the Daleks, which ties back to the first season of Doctor Who with, the mentions of Ian Barbara and all that. I do enjoy Planet of the Daleks. It's really fun. It's a fun little Terry Nation story. It's kind of a compactor of previous stories, and it has its positives, and it has one of my favorite Pertwee speeches, and some of the stuff with Joe in it is exceptional. Terrence Dicks is just a wonderful script editor. But with Three Doctors and Planet of the Daleks, I do like them, but the reason why season 10 is so high is because I love Carnival of Monsters, I love Frontier in Space, and I fucking love The Green Death. My god. Delgado's final appearance in the show in Frontier in Space is exceptional. Star Wars before Star Wars kind of galactic adventure Frontier gives you is so fun. The political subtext is amazing. The Holmes wit and creativity in Carnival of Monsters is just lovely. And the end of Joe's arc in The Green Death is just heartbreaking and wonderful and just magic. It's so magic. And John Pertwee is at his cuddliest, at his most just lovable in season 10. He's a gorgeous man. And yeah, I love season 10 a lot. And that's why it is here. Now we get to the top 10. These are the big boys. Number 10 is season 6. Some of you are going to be like, what? Hang on a second, but what about that story? The Space Pirates is good. That might be one of my biggest hot takes on the show I've ever had, but you can go watch my video that I did with Antonio on the channel of it. I really like the Space Pirates. I think it has a really great story behind it. I think it's super underrated. The Crotons, another underrated story. Go watch my video with Will Maddox on that. That's a good story. And then you get Stuff like The Mind Robber, one of my favorite Doctor Who stories. The Invasion, one of my favorite Doctor Who stories. The Seeds of Death, fucking fun and exceptionally enjoyable and interesting. And The War Games, my favorite Doctor Who story of all time. Patrick Troughton is awesome. Jamie is awesome. Zoe is awesome. The Dominators is admittedly not good, but it's fun. If you view it more as a comedy than an actual moral science fiction story, I think there's a lot more to be enjoyed about the Dominators, but it's a bit of cardboard. But season 6 has so much right going for it. It's so fun. It's so lively and captivating, and it's a finale for the 60s. It really goes all guns blazing and does some setup for the future. Like in The Invasion, we finally get Derek Sherwin giving us, this is the vision for the Jon Pertwee era of Doctor Who. This is UNIT. This is what we've all been building towards. And the War Games. It's the biggest and best and most important story in the history of the show. I love it. I love the War Games. I love Troughton. I love season 6. My number 9. Season 5. Mixed thoughts on the Wheel in Space. The Cybermen are shit. Zoe's character stuff's good. But once you get that stuff out the way, the rest of the season is a breeze. Abominable Snowmen and the Ice Warriors. Enjoyable stories, good stuff in there. Really underrated, both of them, I think. And then the rest of the season is some of my favorite Doctor Who ever. Tomb of the Cybermen, The Enemy of the World, The Web of Fear, Fury from the Deep. All 4 of those stories are wonderful and highlights of the Troughton era. And you've got the amazing team of the Second Doctor, Jamie, and Victoria. I love those 3 characters. They're so fascinating, intricate, and wonderfully written. Marvelous the way they did the anxiety arc with Victoria that I talked about in the Companions ranking and Will Maddox talked about on his video on the Whoniversals channel. Jamie's one of my favorites of all time. I mean, given that I ranked Wilf and the Brig above him, Jamie's my favorite TARDIS traveling companion ever. He's so much fun. And season 5 is Troughton at his absolute peak. He is at the top of his game in this season. I love Troughton in season 5. This is wonderful television. It's the best of 60s Who. It's the best of the Second Doctor, and it's one of the greatest Doctor Who seasons of all time, in my opinion. My number 8 is season 12. So, there was a part of me that wanted to rank this lower, because as much as I love Robot, it has a few qualms. As much as I enjoy the Sontaran Experiment, it has a few qualms. And as much as I admittedly enjoy Revenge of the Cybermen, it has quite a few qualms. But the Ark in Space and Genesis of the Daleks are 2 of my favorite Doctor Who stories of all time. And Genesis in itself is one of the most important ever. It's right up there with stuff like the War Games that I just mentioned. But it's not just the stories. It's Tom Baker's 4th Doctor with Sarah Jane Smith and Harry Sullivan. Wonderful characters, fun stories, great Robert Holmes dialogue, a lovely arc that runs throughout season 12, and a changing of tone between the Barry Letts era to the Philip Hinchcliffe era. It's so just magic to see the show open a new door, because it had really won over a lot of people with the Jon Pertwee era. It had this consistent, this is what Doctor Who is now. And for the first time since the War Games, we were finally going, right, what's next? And then we get the Philip Hinchcliffe era and Genesis of the Daleks. It's like how this show just keeps on reinventing itself and finding new ways to be amazing it's the best. And Tom Baker is just so good as the Doctor. He is amazing. He's so unique and passionate in the role and so funny and whimsical, yet he has serious, dramatic moments. Sarah Jane is just a legend. Yeah, this season is fun, but in regards to the Hinchcliffe era, in terms of seasons, the best was yet to come. Now, at this point in the list, it gets really hard to rank these, but I did find ways to reason with it. My number 7 is Series 4. David Tennant is my favourite Doctor, and this is one of his best parts of his run. Donna Noble is one of my favourite companions. She's amazing. This season has so many great episodes in it. Fires of Pompeii, Planet of the Ood, the criminally underrated Sontaran Stratagem two-parter, Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead, Midnight, Turn Left. If you include the specials, The Waters of Mars is my favourite new episode. Character moments in stuff like Journey's End and The End of Time are things I will never forget. Partners in Crime as well. Some of the character moments in that episode are, again, things I will never forget. Unicorn and the Wasp is one of my biggest guilty pleasures. I think it's fucking hilarious. I understand why some people have issues with it, but I still love watching it. It's so fun. And even in an episode like The Doctor's Daughter or a special like Planet of the Dead, I can scrub through an episode like that and find just an all-time great moment for one of the characters in the season. It's Series 4 is the show at the height of its engineering, of its full hue and range of storytelling color. It's fun, easy to watch, but it doesn't rest on its laurels. It really, really pushes things. And within Series 4 is some of the greatest Doctor Who of all time. I think why I've put it at 7th and not higher, there are aspects to the finale that I prefer execution-wise in other seasons. I just think narratively there are tighter seasons of Doctor Who than Series 4, but that's not to downplay what it does very right, because it does a lot of things very right, including having my favourite companion of all time in it, Wilfred Mott, who is an absolute diamond of a man. So yeah, Series 4 is sensational, extraordinary television. My number 6 is Series 1. Christopher Eccleston is legendary. Billie Piper as Rose Tyler in this season is legendary. The introduction of Jack Harkness is awesome. And all those other side characters like Mickey Smith and Jackie Tyler. What a way to build a new world to bring back the show. Just what an accomplishment. And some of these stories. Dalek, Father's Day, The Empty Child, Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways, and really underrated stuff like Aliens of London World War III that I think has a lot of great character work in it. And stuff like The Unquiet Dead that is unsung, and The End of the World, which has great character stuff, and Rose being able to bring back the show to such appeal. And depending on how you look at it, I think there's a lot to like about something like a Boomtown, for example. And, you know, it's not a perfect season. The long game has a lot of issues, and there's things scattered throughout the season where I'm like, okay, that didn't quite work, and that didn't quite work, and there's things like that could be better about it. But as a return to form, as a return from the dead, fucking hell, this series, to bring back the show, did an unreal job. And as I said, Eccleston is superlative as the Doctor, and Russell T Davies is an absolute legend and always will be for what he did for the show in 2005. Thank you, sir. Top 5 time. Whew. My number 5 is season 13. This came so close to being a hit after hit after hit after hit season. I don't like the android invasion too much. I like the first episode, but after that it loses me, which is the blip here. Zygons is fun, and then the rest of the season, again, I've said this so many times in this list, but it's some of my favourite Doctor Who there's ever been. Planet of Evil, Pyramids of Mars, The Brain of Morbius, The Seeds of Doom, and then you add on the fact that this is the peak of Tom Baker, 4th Doctor, and Sarah Jane Smith. Finally, with that iconic connection and dynamic together. It's legendary, juicy gothic horror, and it has plenty of laughs. Wonderful Doctor Who. This is sensational, and if the android invasion was as good as the other stories, this might be the greatest season of Doctor Who, at least in the classic series. But it's not. But I admire it for coming super close. And if I'm allowed to skip the android invasion, I would love to rewatch this season any day, because it is a very fun time. My number 4 is season 14. I think this, whilst maybe not quite as iconic as 13, it's slightly tighter in terms of storytelling. The Sarah Jane episodes, you could argue, aren't some of the greatest ever. I think Mask of Mandragora is super underrated. I really like that episode. The Hand of Fear is mixed, but what you get out of the episode, especially with Sarah Jane's exit arc, is marvelously iconic and wonderful, and some of my favorite subdued acting the show's ever done. And then after that, The Deadly Assassin, The Face of Evil, The Robots of Death, The Talons of Wang Chiang, and of course, Leela. It's amazing and caps off the Hinchcliffe era beautifully. Arguably prematurely, I would have liked Hinchcliffe to do season 15, or at least some of it. Yeah, 14 is one of the best Doctor Who seasons. It's a great ride start to finish. Tom is conquering all kinds of great as the Doctor. You get the end of Sarah and the start of Leela, and The Deadly Assassin is one of the most unique shows and one of the most unique stories in the show. So yeah, 14 is wonderful, and a lot of people would choose 13 or 14 as their favorite Tom Baker season, but not me. I have a bit of a hot take on this one. I know this is slightly controversial, but it's my list, and I get something very special out of this. Season 16, which is also known as The Key to Time. This really clicked for me when I watched the Armageddon Factor. Sometimes seeing the finale really puts in perspective the entire season, for better or worse. And having the Doctor truly put the morals behind his perspective on the key to time, and his point of view on what his goals as a character really are deep down, what they have been set up as since the start of season 12, and what they will still pertain to be going forward until his end. I feel like the Armageddon Factor as the finale really is one of the most important stories for the arc of the 4th Doctor. And not to forget that the Ribos operation, the Pirate Planet, the Stones of Blood, and the Androids of Tara are 4 of my favourite Doctor Who stories of all time, and The Power of Kroll is a fun monster movie story with some funny moments. It's not great, but it's enjoyable enough for me. But as I said, what really puts it together is, for me, the criminally underrated The Armageddon Factor as a story does so much for the Fourth Doctor's character and so much for this season. And on top of that, you've got Mary Tam as Romana, who is amazing in the role. I love her dynamic with the Doctor. K9 is so much fun. This is probably the best K9 gets in the show. And it's so, like, the sense of adventure, the fact that they spend almost every story away from Earth for the most part, except for Stones of Blood, but again, that has a mystical element to it as well. It's bright and colourful and wonderful and beautiful and gorgeous. It's, in terms of the fantastical and the fun and the whimsical and the cheeky and just escapist part of this show, season 16 is everything I want from this show. And it's so much fun on top of being a great exploration of the Fourth Doctor's character to both pair a very smart and well-written arc for his character motivation, but also have it be so tongue-in-cheek and so in taste of the Douglas Adams to be and sort of Graham Williams and Anthony Reed style of the show. It just blows me away. I love it. I love season 16. It's so underrated. And that's why it's my number 3. My number 2 is the most consistent and arguably best written season of Doctor Who ever made, and that is season 7. Jon Pertwee's third Doctor, Liz Shaw, and the Brigadier. Perfect. Spearhead from Space is a great start. The Autons are a genius concept by Robert Holmes, and the full establishment of UNIT by this point after the invasion with the Brigadier and Liz Shaw, and just the whole Derek Sherman production style and the grittiness of this season. And then, of course, you've got the epic 7-part serials, Doctor Who and the Silurians, one of my favourite Doctor Who stories of all time, The Ambassadors of Death, in my opinion, despite being a slight mess, one of the most underrated and enjoyable and gripping Doctor Who stories of all time. And Inferno, one of my favourite Doctor Who stories of all time. It is a belter of a season. It is so good in pretty much every aspect. It looks so just captivating, and it hits you hard. It treats your intelligence with respect. The dialogue is wonderful. It is wonderfully and sharp. Jon Pertwee is a lovable asshole. Man, what a season. And I think craft-wise, 7 is the most consistent and the best. But just for me personally, in my heart, there is one other season that I love just a little bit more. My number 1, Series 3. There are plot issues with 42. I still think there are some character things I like in it, especially with Martha's mum. This season isn't the most consistent. There's issues in quite a few episodes, little plot mechanic aspects of Lazarus Experiment, despite some phenomenal character work, along with mechanical plot issues with Evolution of the Daleks, for example, or questionable moral things with Shakespeare Code, but I do think they are blown out of proportion. And, you know, for example, JXE on a stream talked about Blink and some of the stuff with the Weeping Angels. But this ranking isn't about what season of Doctor Who has the most perfectly consistent run of episodes. This is about, as a whole package, warts and all, where does my heart lie? Where do I really get what I love the most out of this show within a season? And for all its faults, Series 3 gives that to me. Through banging episodes like Smith and Jones, And yes, I love the Shakespeare Code. A lot of people hate it, and that's okay. I love it. Gridlock is one of my favorite episodes of all time. Human Nature and the Family of Blood is one of my favorite stories of all time. Blink is awesome and cool. And Utopia, The Sound of Drums. And, yes, you heard me right, Last of the Time Lords is a wonderful, epic, and sensational finale. The 10th Doctor, for me, is, as a character, challenged at his most and brought to his super duper peak mode in Series 3. And Martha Jones is one of the greatest companions of all time. And Jack is in the last 3 episodes, and he's great in it too. The subtext and the themes around faith, around toxicity, around incompatible friends can't coexist when it is unhealthy, yet can respect and admire each other. The way that it explores humanity's dogma in a crisis. John Sim as the Master is fucking exceptional. Derek Jacobi as Professor Yana and the Master is fucking exceptional. Harry Lloyd as Baines is fucking exceptional. Gridlock is a masterpiece and deserves all the love. And it even has its fun moments like the Jadoon and the Carrionites and the Dalek hybrid Sek and Mark Gatiss playing a creepy old man. The morale of the Lazarus experiment, the Doctor understanding through his long years lived that forcing immortality is a curse, and how trying to control your life with that kind of power strips it of its meaning and turns you into a cynical waste. And that tying into the finale and the Master, and it is the most sensationally satisfying wrapped bow of wrapped bows. And Russell T Davies in 2007, well, I guess he wrote it in 06, but when he wrote Series 3, oh my god, that man is a genius. That man is... How does he do it? How does he write episodes that I can watch over the years repeatedly, and every time I see them, I dig out new things to love about them? It is the most thematically and character arc-wise dense season of the show, and I will hold that to any other season. As I said, it's not perfectly consistent, but my god, when it gets it right, it is the best ever. It is glorious to watch, and I don't think it'll happen. I have serious doubts, but if Russell T Davies could ever get back to these heights again, it would change my life, and I know that because Series 3 has changed my life in many ways. Some that I can never explain properly, and some you may never understand. All I can say is I love it, and I wish with all my heart of hearts that any of you who have watched Series 3 can get what I've gotten out of it, because Jesus Christ, it is so good. And that's my list, ranking all seasons of the wonderful Doctor Who TV show. I hope you all enjoyed Day 25. I bid you adieu, a good night, and a goodbye. Bye-bye.